Power creep is something that has always been on the mind of Star Rail players. In the patch when Danheng came out, we really thought that we had seen the absolute peak of DPS units, until literally the next patch when Jingyuan was released, and a lot of the community really thought that characters were just going to keep getting stronger endlessly until the game finally ended service. Now luckily huohuo didn't go down that path and they slowed it down after Jingliu, but it's only so long before power creep starts showing up again. Now the reason I'm talking about this is because I'm almost certain that there is one type of unit that is in severe danger of being power crept very soon. Now if you aren't familiar with the term power creep or haven't played any games that have to deal with it, it refers to when newer content or features make older ones irrelevant simply by being almost objectively better. In gacha games this is normally used when talking about characters, where newer ones can just be better versions of older ones. I don't really have much experience with huohuo's other games like Honkai 3rd, but in Genshin and Star Rail they've been doing a pretty good job at avoiding power creep in their limited 5 stars. Genshin being an older game makes this extra impressive, where we're only starting to kind of see a little bit of power creep with some of its newest additions. And if anything, Genshin suffers from reverse power creep, where some of the older characters are still arguably a little too dominant in meta teams. Star Rail is a bit of a younger game, with its first anniversary coming up very soon. And since it's also a turn-based game, I think it's going to have a bit of a rougher journey avoiding power creep. Now the reason I say this is because even when characters have very similar kits in a game like Genshin, since it's a third-person RPG, it's very easy for huohuo to make them feel different to play. An easy example of this is with Ayato and Neuvillette. In a lot of ways Neuvillette does what Ayato does but better, but if you tried playing them both they still feel like completely different characters. Star Rail doesn't really have this luxury. Animations can be different, but there's only so many different ways to make characters work when players only interact with a skill and an ultimate, with everything else like talents and traces working passively. They've done a pretty good job so far with characters like Imbibe de Lune with his enhanced basic, and the new Acheron who has an ulti that works completely different from everyone else. But it's only so long before newer characters start having very similar kits to characters that already exist. An example of this already in the game is with Jingyuan and Argenti, where if we simplify both their skill and their ult, they're both just standard AoE damage dealing abilities. What differentiates them is obviously the Lightning Lord and Argenti's enhanced ult, but at their base, their kits are still very similar. Now because of this, even when Star Rail releases characters that are only slightly stronger, it's going to be very obvious when power creep is occurring. Now to get back onto the topic of the video, the one type of character that I'm almost certain is going to get power creep very soon is going to be our sustaining characters. Now we only have 3 limited sustains in the game currently, with luocha, fuxuan and huohuo, but the reason I'm bringing this up now is because with patch 2.1, these 3 are finally beginning to rerun in the banners, and our 4th sustain in aventurine is going to be showing up in the second half. Out of these guys, I'm going to be focusing on luocha the most, because he's the one who's most likely to fall victim to power creep the soonest, but this can be applied to the others as well. Now to explain why these guys are going to get power creep so soon, we need to talk about what you actually want from a healer or shielder. Now we're going to assume that every sustain unit that huohuo releases is going to excel at their primary job, which is just keeping your team alive. If a character they release does have weaker sustain capabilities, it's most likely that they're going to excel in something else, so we're going to ignore these types of characters for now. Since Memory of Chaos and Pure Fiction is all round based, what you want from your sustains is not really insane healing capabilities, but rather what they offer offensively. To clear this content, you're trying to kill enemies as fast as you can, so you're always going to prefer sustains that can help you with this. If you look at our current Star Rail units, you can already see that they are slowly pushing towards this. Luocha, our first healer, doesn't really offer much offensively. He has very negligible damage, but at least he does have an offensive dispel in his ult. Fuxuan started offering more with her crit rate buff when you're in her field, and then finally huohuo has a very relevant energy regen and attack percent buff. If we look even further ahead with aventurine, we already know from the livestream that he has a debuff in his ult, and he also has a follow-up attack that might do a decent amount of damage. So sustains in the game are already slowly offering more and more offensively, and you can assume this is going to just keep happening as more release. Going back to luocha, the main reason players like him so much is because of how comfy he makes the game. He has insane healing capabilities, and you don't even need to worry about it, as all he needs to do is auto attack, and then passively he'll create his field and he'll have his auto skill. But what happens when a sustain unit releases who also doesn't use skill points, but simply buffs your team a bit? Maybe they give damage percent, or maybe they give crit, it doesn't really really matter because luocha simply doesn't do much except heal. Huohuo already almost made it there, except technically she does need to use some skill points to sustain, so luocha still has that over her, but a future character that doesn't use skill points to heal and provides some buffs doesn't seem too crazy of an idea. Now luocha's ult is still very unique to him, offering an offensive dispel, and if they do add more enemies that it's effective on, that would make him a lot stronger, but currently we only have that one Sanctus Medicus enemy. Now I did go super hard on luocha, but you can apply the same thing to fuxuan and huohuo. These two do have some buffs, and fuxuan does have a pretty unique way of sustaining, but the idea of characters that work really similar to them being released, but just having better offensive buffs doesn't seem too out of the picture. Most likely it's going to take a bit longer for these two to get powercrept, unlike luocha, but it's still definitely going to come eventually. Now to go back to what I mentioned earlier, what if huohuo starts releasing sustain units that don't really heal or shield well, but prioritize more of their offensive capabilities? Would this make characters like luocha more valuable? I don't really think it's going to do that, and I can almost guarantee that if characters like this do get released, there's a good chance that they're going to be meta. Players are simply going to do more damage with these characters, and you're going to kill stuff faster, so you won't really have to worry about healing too much. You can kind of already see this taking place with a lot of players doing 0 cycles with triple harmony instead of running sustains. Now obviously this is all speculation and we have no idea what Hoyoverse is going to do with their future sustain units. They could easily just start adding characters that don't sustain as well and also don't add really much offensively. It's entirely up to what they do. With the path they're currently going, it does look like in the future our abundance and preservation units are going to have a little bit of harmony mixed into their kits. Now in my opinion, the worst way power creep can happen is not when a character is only objectively stronger, but when they also remove any reason to play these weaker characters. This is something that people talk a lot about with DPS units, except I think it applies even more to our sustains. In the current endgame content we have only ever needed 2 teams at the max. With DPS units, this does normally mean you can force your way through with only 2 of them, but with enemies having different element weaknesses and different flaws being more single target or AoE heavy, having a variety of more DPS units normally benefits you. Our sustains on the other hand almost never need to match the content you're facing. Sustain units aren't really damage focused, so matching the element weakness doesn't matter at all. This also means that they don't care if the enemies are single target or AoE. Now the only argument against this currently is with our newest boss Sam, who applies a debuff that makes healing less effective. Obviously this is Hoyoverse trying to force us to use a different type of sustain, but even against this our current healers can force our way through. Now the only reason I can see this becoming a real problem in the future is if new enemies start hard forcing you to one specific type of sustain, but I don't really think Hoyoverse would do that because it could look bad on their part forcing us to pull for specific characters. So what does this mean for our current sustainers? Since we probably only ever need 2 of them, you're almost always going to use the strongest ones, and the harsh reality is that most of the time these are going to be the newest characters. Now just to finalize, I hope I haven't derailed anyone's pulling plans too hard. At the end of the day, if you really like any of these sustain characters, 100% pull for them. Even if sustains are starting to get more and more buffs to the team, it's going to take a really long time before these buffs become so absurd where they actually heavily affect team performance. Even if they are powercrept, characters like luocha still sustain really well, and at a baseline that's all we really need from them, so if you're happy with that, they're still going to be a fine pull. From a meta perspective, however, the best play is probably always going to be looking at the newer sustains and seeing how much they can offer offensively to the teams you want to play. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. If you found this interesting at all, please leave a like and subscribe, and comment what you think about this topic, as I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. Thanks for watching.